Yeah, I just was afraid that I'd have to, like, out for a week. Thank you very much, Steve.
Pretty good bet.
Okay. Will everyone please take their seats? Thank you. We're going to go ahead and continue our City Committee of the Whole meeting. Madam Clerk, oh, actually, that's right, we've called the roll, but do we have a motion to come back into come back into regular session?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Painter. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Schmidt. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Wombley.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Matthey.
Here.
Alderman Painter.
Here.
Alderman Sage.
Yes.
Alderman Black.
Yes.
Alderman Hammond.
Yes.
Alderman Bray.
I'm going to just assume that when you said here, you meant yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we do have a quorum, and we're here, and we're back in action. At this point, we have a presentation on the implementation of Downtown Bloomington Task Force recommendations, the non-catalyst projects only. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Rasmussen.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I did want to at least introduce to everyone Ashley Laura, who will be as our legislative assistant, is sitting in as a city clerk today as Cherry Lawson is traveling for training. And so this is the first time we have Ashley there, and so she's all set to do it, and we're going to have her again when we need somebody in that position. Okay, thank you very much. On the Downtown Task Force, I wanted to start out by thanking the members of the Downtown Task Force very much for all of their hard work over the last year as they came up with their report and recommendations. Now, however, we wanted to give you an update on where we were moving with that, and so I'm going to ask Bob Mart to do that and give you a rundown on it. But what it has about it is it has the format of being an implementation plan. Now, many of these things are easy and we can do them quickly, and they're low-hanging fruit. Other things require resources and require some time, and so what we will do is we'll get your discussion, your input on it, and then when we have some way of putting this together into a resolution, we'll bring it back to you at a subsequent City Council meeting to vote on. And the reason that I would like to do that is then we have it as you acting as a group, and we get your vote on it, and so then when we begin to spend resources and people and time to do these things, the answer for why are we doing that is it because we've got council direction. And as you know, with our budget situation, our personnel situation, everything we do means that we're not going to be doing something else. And so we want to make sure that we have your direction in doing that. And then as we move forward, we'll tell you what those things are, what they'll cost, and what we may not be doing in place of doing those things. Secondly, when we get near the end of this, I'll ask Bob to transition over to Jim Karch, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the street resurfacing program, because some of these downtown projects have to do with downtown resurfacing, and we want to let you know where we're going with that. And Jim will walk through that because that process will begin this summer, and we'll want to let you know that and have any guidance you may have on that as well. So if there are no initial questions, then I'll ask Bob Mart to come up and get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Hey, I'd really like to start tonight to kind of talk about when we did the initial presentation back in December. You know, I was new to the organization at that time. We did a follow-up status update back in late February. But just know that we haven't stopped working on the projects that were listed within the task force at that time. I think what we came to is, in our discussions internally with staff, we wanted to make sure that that our projects that we were deciding on actually met the recommendations that the task force was looking at. And so this evening what we wanted to talk about was the potential of either adopting the task force recommendations in with or without exceptions, and then also to consider the draft work plan that's being presented by staff this evening. So the Downtown Task Force initially reviewed several documents related to the downtown and to the overall community, and prioritize low-hanging fruit and some projects that we could get done within the year or thereabouts. So the recommendations that came out of the task force were beautification, public art, public spaces and walkability, public parking, and areas of opportunity. So the staff's preliminarily recommending that we adopt the final task force recommendations, and what we want the council to consider is to evaluate the impacts that those recommendations would make on the community and the downtown, identify workable projects, assign the coordinators that are responsible for those projects, define a timeline, and establish cost estimates for budgeting. So the initial, we set up a work plan, and we provided one on your desk this evening. And this is the first one, is the Downtown Bloomington Final Task Force Final Report Implementation. And what you'll see there is ongoing tasks, short-term tasks, and medium and long-term tasks along the right side, and then assigning those tasks and coordination across the table. So in this case, we're asking the City Council to basically adopt the task force recommendations, and then staff would implement it in the spring. It's not a requirement, but it's something that we would like staff to, or the City Council to consider whenever we bring a plan forward, so that you're all that you provide that appropriate direction to staff. I'm having trouble with my thing tonight. So under the task force recommendations, under beautification, public art, work plan, we had several projects that we wanted to continue and implement for the community. And the tree well program is already existing. What we're trying to do there is coordinate some additional efforts on themes so that there's a consistent planting plan throughout the downtown. Looking at our public right-of-ways and public lands program, there's a need for, expressed in the task force, to create a park-like setting in our downtown. And I think what you're seeing now with some of the bump outs that are going in on Mulberry and Main, some of these landscaping aesthetics and bump outs that are going in. We're also looking at our Adopt a Pot program, and that was where we were discussing the implementation of self-watering planters. Those planters that are still in good shape, if we phase in an approach to purchasing new planters specifically to the downtown core, we may be able to move those other planters off into the warehouse district or some other transition areas throughout the downtown.
Excuse me, Bob. If I could add one thing too, we'd like this to be a dialogue, so don't wait to the end of the presentation to have questions or comments, because we'd like to do this as we move along. So interrupt us when you'd like.
Yeah. So the mural program is ongoing, as well as the paintings of the traffic signal boxes. We're looking at tactical urbanism and adoption of the downtown streetscape master plan, because there were some elements of the plan or the task force recommendations regarding lighting. And so there's some Center Street and Front Street that do not have the decorative lighting in place, and it's difficult to provide holiday decorations and create that aesthetic that you see on Main Street with the hanging lighting and that type of thing, when we don't have those same streetscape elements on these other streets. So if you were to look at your actual work plan, we've identified under beautification the layout for the tree well garden program, the Adopt a Pot, the tactical urbanism, and the mural program, and you'll see that there's timelines associated with each one of those tasks and projects. So I'd be happy to go over those if you want to just talk to those. I think the most important one here that staff hadn't before addressed was the actual adoption of the downtown streetscape master plan. And so here we have a document that was adopted essentially in 2015 that although we've been kind of periodically implementing through our efforts in the downtown area, it's not a plan that the City Council has actually adopted. So staff is kind of like, do we actually move forward on these recommendations within the plan, or should we hold back on those kind of things? So I think it's important that the City Council takes time staff and the City Council takes time to review that document once again, make sure it's current, provide those updates, and then move forward with consideration on adoption of that master plan.
I have a question about the adopt-a-pot.
Yes.
Are you still going to let everybody plant their own, or are you going to have themed plantings in every pot so that it's kind of uniform? Yeah.
So that's something that we're looking at right now, and you'll see that under the short-term plan right now. You'll see themed planting coordination and suggested planting. We've been working with our horticulturists from the Parks Department on developing a set of 3 planting coordination design templates. That's what we're using. That's what we're calling it. And then we're going to share that with the coordinators of that program, so and with the horticulturists and the nurseries that provide those plants to our business owners. So they can walk in, show them the theme, walk out with a consistent palette for the downtown.
Great.
Yeah.
And the other question is, what are you going to do in the tree wells?
It was a similar situation where we were getting a kind of a hodgepodge of plantings, some that weren't sun tolerant, some that were not shade tolerant. We were kind of getting a mix of that. And similar, the Park Department has provided us with some schematics and some design themes. And
we'll have the schematics in place by the end of this week.
Right.
Okay, great. And so is the downtown corridor going to be turned over to the Parks Department?
That's not our initial intent. That's something that we could continue our discussions on. Right now, they are responsible for the bump outs and the landscape plantings within the municipal parking lots. So that's something that we felt was consistent. I think I don't think that we'd be turning over the public right-of-ways areas to them in total. So,
okay, thank you.
But I mean, that's for continued discussion.
Okay. Yeah. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Huge compliments on those bump outs. Those are amazing, and I saw the plantings go in for Market in Maine the other day, and I have no idea what you have in store for Front Street, but it looks awesome. Is that something that's going to occur throughout the downtown then? Are there already places identified for those sidewalk plantings and bump outs?
The mix shown within the master plan?
Yes, we do. Those are shown within that. Again, we really like the council to approve that downtown streetscape master plan. Staff by default has been using that as our go-to because there was no objections to it. But Bob Mart is correct that we'd like to see that approved.
So when that came before the council in 2015, there was not actually a vote. We discussed it without a vote in 15. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
So that is correct. Staff has been moving forward with the Downtown Streetscape Master Plan. It was discussed starting in 2014 into 2015, never taken back to the council for final action, but there were no objections at the time. Staff, in lieu of council direction, we've been working with what we have, and so we've been taking action. As we've always said, we try to be opportunistic. When there are opportunities for us to make improvements, we try to do that. And again, huge credit to Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts. Dave Lamb and Bobby Mays have been wonderful with their staff to really, they see that vision, and they've been doing a great job with it as well.
Okay. Alderman Black.
So you may not have an answer to this question, and Jim kind of alluded to it a second ago, and Johnny touched on it. What would staff's objection be to turning downtown into a designated park or over to Parks and Rec? Is that a question we can answer now, or do we need to bring that back at some later point in time?
I would think that we'd have to answer it at a different time. We could bring it back when we make our final recommendations for the work plan and or the task force. I'd like Jay to participate in that discussion.
And if you're looking for us to kind of give some feedback, I for one would like to see staff feedback on that. I've heard and I've seen in a lot of other areas that have had revitalization in their downtown area, making it a park has helped move resources more effectively to create that sense of place. And I continue to hear from folks that that would be one solution to the challenges that we face downtown. So I would be interested in that. I don't know where my colleagues would fall on that topic.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mark, go ahead.
Okay.
Could I answer that real quickly? One of the things that we've been trying to do is get from the council and the community what it is we want to have as the downtown as our goal in mind. What is the final objective here? And if having a downtown park, having the downtown as a park is the goal in mind, that could be the final goal that we're moving towards if the council would want to move in that direction. That might be the goal.
I guess just to respond to that is I think that making it a park would be more of a journey than a destination, not to get more philosophical, but I hear you in getting a vision from us to designate resources, but I think from where I would sit, making it a park would create that kind of long-term city investment to the placemaking, the look, the feel of downtown.
Okay. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Just to add on to that, I mean, to me, I think the goal is that we build downtown and as an asset and an economic driver. And certainly an important part of that is conveying to people who might want to invest in our downtown and those who have already invested in our downtown that downtown Bloomington is an important neighborhood and a core part of who we are. Whether that happens in the Parks Department or not, I don't know. I really have appreciated all the work Tricia's done in wrangling all of the volunteers, and maybe having some more guidance is what it takes. I'm open to that conversation either way.
Thank you. Alderman Sage.
Thank you. So Steve, when you asked just a second ago if the council desires the downtown to be a park, was that a rhetorical question or?
It was because what happens is we're looking for the goal as to where all of this is heading, and if we find that out, then we know if we're having some action that requires resources, we would recommend doing it if it contributes to that long-term goal. If it doesn't contribute to that long-term goal, then we would not want to spend resources in it. And we've talked a lot about that, but we haven't really identified what that long-term goal is, and part of this conversation will help us get to that point. There are many different options we could have.
And the reason I ask is I guess I'd want to understand all the ramifications of a broad brush statement like that before, I could have a more meaningful conversation about it. I mean, including things like what might be some unintended consequences potentially of a statement or a policy like that. So that's why I ask if you're.
Sure.
But I think your point's a good one, right? We want to know what the destination is.
Before we'd have to have a lot of those conversations because for this particular one there are a lot of ramifications, but it is one idea that is good to throw out there, and that's the kind of thing we're hoping to get from you here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So we'll continue on the discussion on the work plans. The next recommendation from the task force, overall recommendation, was public spaces and walkability work plan. This was related to the public spaces in the Law and Justice Center, the shared spaces model for Jefferson Street, the shared spaces model for Front Street, and again, another recommendation that relied back on the downtown streetscape master plan. So if you look at the work plan here, you'll see some of how we're considering laying out our work on the public spaces enhancements, and that's a great deal of coordination with the county on their spaces there, and then working with our downtown partners as well. And then council would certainly have a role in that as well. As far as the shared space models, Jim will be discussing that later on in this evening for both primarily Jefferson, but it would also apply to Front Street on this resurfacing that they're doing throughout the community. And then the adoption of the streetscape master plan related to the downtown crosswalks and some of the tactical urbanism that's being discussed as well.
Can I ask Question. On the shared spaces, I was wondering if maybe you could share just your brief overview of what a shared space might look like in the downtown area to kind of give us a preview of what Jim will be discussing.
Sure. What I've witnessed in other communities is a shared use of the actual pavement areas and sidewalk areas. You might see shared bike lanes in addition to on-street parking, kind of a mix of pedestrian ways and car spaces. But you're slowing that traffic down in order to accommodate the shared use of that pavement and the roadways and the right-of-ways there.
Alderwoman Schmidt.
A follow-up to that, I think we received not too long before this meeting an email expressing concern from a business owner on Jefferson Street that we haven't really socialized this whole concept. So I don't know what our plans are. Should we agree that we want to move forward with Jefferson Street or any of the other ones, how we might roll that out? I took Trish's name in vain when I responded. It's one of those things we have to be very methodical about, so I hope that if we move ahead with Jefferson, that we allow enough time for people to answer.
So Jim will have some more in-depth conversation there, but if you see on our preliminary draft work plan, we're looking at, certainly a review of the existing conditions and the some sort of public outreach through the summer months, and then if we were to kind of implement this project, certainly design and bidding and then construction. So that would be the general phases that we would outline within a work plan. That would be based on whether or not the funding is available for those projects, what kind of public input we do get, and then certainly the timeline for construction. So that's something that'll be a little bit more in depth later.
Yes, if I could, some of these projects, like the Adopt a Pot, probably doesn't require the amount of public input that something like a shared space would. And so each one of these will be different, and we'll, as a staff, will work through it and include you and the public and everyone, so there's lots of dialogue before we move through something that changes something very much.
Thank you.
Alderman Black.
Thank you. And maybe I'm going to be raining on Jim's parade here in a little bit with this question. So I guess when we talk about kind of a shared street model or vacating the street, what would the cost be to, say, piloting that for a summer or a few weeks to see what that would look like? Do you want me to wait?
Yeah.
I'll wait.
Right. I think that's probably best, and it may or may not include the closing of a street. So that's one of the concepts that need to be discussed. So, as far as the recommendations related to public parking, one recommendation was to move all city and county-owned vehicles into the covered parking garages, and that program is currently being implemented through our facilities. We've relocated all but 8 parking spaces from the government center lot over to the Lincoln parking deck, and this is the first week of that program, so we're anxious to see how that all turns out. Actually, staff's been very cooperative about getting their cars up as far as we can go in the deck, especially on the weekends, which we've always kind of had that program. But opening up the surface parking lots was our initial pilot program for that. So I think that's going to work out well. The next one is deciding on traffic lanes or adjusting the traffic on Main and Center Street. I think that one's going to take a great deal of more study and certainly public outreach. And you kind of see some timelines there for implementing that. The next one is doing the parking study, and I think, in talking with Russ, I think he's interested in doing this project in-house, and I think they're capable of doing that project in-house, and I think looking at the time frame, we're looking at basically research through the summer and fall, adopt the plans, parking plans in the winter of 2018. So I think we can move along with that project as well.
Excuse me, Bob, and I may be the only one, but as we're moving from item to item, if you could just give us maybe a quick page number reference or something,
I'm sorry.
because...
Okay,
Thank you.
We're currently on page 8.
Yeah, and you're...
That would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll second.
You were shifting without a clutch
the
on me there,
implications.
man, and I didn't, I was having trouble staying with you, so thanks.
So the next discussion item is the areas of additional opportunity, and these were more specific projects that we could concentrate on. The first one was partner with the Town of Normal and IDOT on completing the Main Street Corridor Plan. We had the plan worked on several years ago. I don't know if the Town of Normal had actually adopted that plan, but that's something that the task force did recommend we reevaluate, and that plan could probably be resurrected in some form. The next one was to install public restrooms in the downtown, and I know this is a priority, but what we're looking at right now is cost and site location. And I think the first thing is we wanted to make sure that the City Council was aware that there's numerous public bathrooms within the downtown provided by many of our businesses, government agencies, and social service agencies. And I think what our initial response is that we'd like to do more of a public education campaign with putting some flyers around downtown, either that's in the parking facilities or something like that, to get those folks to those sites. And then as we look at the Connect Transit transfer station in the future, that might be an opportunity to place public restrooms there and maybe some other sites throughout the downtown. But this is a point of discussion we had to continue.
I like where you're going with looking at the transit station later. I'll just tell you that the majority of those restrooms are closed from Saturday, 5 o'clock, all the way through to Monday. So of the ones that you're talking about in public spaces, those buildings are mostly shut down for the majority of the weekend. So
that was a good point of discussion with staff had. It was like, is the council interested in doing and get going on this right quick, and where we'd have to do some sort of porta potties thing? And we were debating of whether or not that was really feasible to do the porta potties with the rental costs and the cleaning and that type of thing. Versus, try to look long-term at what's an appropriate permanent solution.
this was actually on there because I insisted it be on there, the public restrooms one. So I am not insisting that it need to go on there right away, but I thought it just needed to be part of the conversation as part of the longer-term plan. So, do we need to do porta potties right now? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I spend a significant amount of time downtown, and we're starting into tourism season. I had a couple with their kids that were from Germany that were in the bakery last Friday, and they had shipped their car from Germany to Chicago, gotten in the car in Chicago, and were starting, and they were going to drive the entire Route 66 all the way to California. The kids didn't look too thrilled about the idea, but the dad was trying to recreate the trip that his father and his uncle took, and so it was a really interesting conversation. I talked with them for like 35 minutes, and they had just left Pontiac and had stopped here, and we're moving on down the line. So these summer months are kind of where we're going to have our core. If we can, Steve's question earlier was, where do we start? What's the vision for downtown? And my vision for that core part is that should be where we're focusing all of our efforts in terms of tourism, right? That's,
And when you say core, specifically you're talking about?
Yeah, the core inside the couplet, and it's actually a couple more down. I'm going to jump ahead on Bob. Adopt zoning changes to support downtown development. One of the things that planning had come to the downtown task force was saying we're not doing this right. Downtown as zoned right now is too big. And so they're proposing to change it to a core of the core of the downtown, and then a supporting area supporting the downtown. And I think it ended up in 2 or 3 different zoning designations. So that very center core one, which is basically Main Street and Center Street from Market to Front Street, that should be the core of our efforts if we are going to try to capture anything with tourism, in my mind.
So actually, if you look...
Can I interrupt too on one other thing? We did have a homeless task force that we had been meeting on an ad hoc basis, and the issue of public restrooms was also an issue that involved the homeless task force as well. And that has 2 elements on it. On the one hand, it provides a place for people to use public restrooms without having to go into businesses, which was causing something of a problem. On the other hand, maybe it attracts people to those areas, and so there's a balance that has to be achieved on that. But we had been working fairly aggressively at different models for public restrooms, and that may be one of the things in here that we would bring back to you pretty quickly.
Because as Jamie points out, especially the Route 66 Visitor Center has made a contribution, if you will, in that regard. But if you're talking about late Saturday afternoon through Monday morning, there really are comparatively few options.
Well, I think if we take the opportunity to look on page 9, item number 2, that is our install public restrooms, and you can kind of see the time frame that staff is kind of working through right now. Looking at the short term, we already have some of the identified public restrooms downtown. We have not really advertised and done our job of getting that public information out, and that's something that we can do this spring. And then looking at the midterm, I mean, looking at, or doing our site analysis and maybe facility design, maybe bidding, but we're really kind of looking out into the summer of 2019 after we go through the next budget year. So that's something that we need to consider. And so you look at maybe the long term that would by summer of 2020 or thereabouts that we would have full permanent restrooms in the downtown. So those are things that we need to discuss, of whether on the work plan, whether those things need to move up or need to move down. But that's kind of where we're at with looking at our schedules and looking at the construction seasons and our budget seasons. So.
We have a lot of questions on public restrooms here.
Okay. Alderman Black, Millawamboy, and Sage.
Thank you. And I'm looking at this as an opportunity to kind of declare publicly where we're at on some of these topics, because we have to prioritize our dollars and time in specific ways. And as we talk about things that are going to have the biggest bang for our buck, I can't deny that public restrooms would come to the top of my list. That is an infrastructure challenge that will encourage concert venues, festivals, people coming downtown. We want car shows. If you're looking for my ultimate destination, downtown is the destination for this county and this region. If someone wants to challenge me and say it's a waste of money to put that in there for all logistical challenges, I mean, look at just a little bit south of Uptown. They have that area by the Constitution Trail in Normal where they have a public theater, public restroom, and people are coming and going there all of the time. Once we take care of what I would consider to be the basics, that's how we can grow the economy in that area and bring people down to encourage them to be here. And if we're looking at different options, I think public education is critical. I get it. But I think this would be a small investment for us to get large dividends over time with people coming down. I mean, I think the Beer, Bacon, and Bourbon Festival sold out, 2,000 people. Jazz Fest, Jazz Up Front, huge. I mean, packed on Front Street. The Farmers Market, I mean, I'm probably forgetting a bunch. Cogs and Corsets. People are craving these types of things, and they look to us and say, why can't the city do something? This would be a huge incentive for those types of festivals and those types of groups to come down here, which is ultimately, I think, everybody's goal. So when coming back in the medium-term solution, I will publicly say I want to see a robust public restroom, and we can sort some of the details out with how that looks. But costs, bids, timeline, because that will make a big splash from where I sit.
I think it's important from staff standpoint that we actually tried to lay out a work plan that we're holding ourselves to some benchmarks that the council gives us direction on. So that's kind of where we're at. It's like we could push these things further back, we could move them forward, or if we wanted to cherry pick, we could just leave them alone if we didn't have these kind of discussions. So that's why I felt it was important as a staff member that we bring this work plan to you for discussion, and whether or not you want to adopt any or all of these to help us provide the direction we need to move forward on these. So,
Alderman Millawamboy and Sage.
Sure. Thank you. Bob, I just wanted to be sure that I understood where you land on the porta potties.
I personally am not a fan of the porta potties. I think we'll have it. We haven't done really the estimates on it, but I think we're probably between 30 and 60 a year.
Okay.
And then there's also the cleaning responsibility. So I thought our short-term solution was to work with our downtown partners to see if we couldn't expand the opportunities for existing public restrooms, and then providing that education of where they're located.
Very good. Good answer. Because I'm not a big fan either, because I've always thought they look tacky, honestly. I mean, there's no other way, to talk about.
You could consider them in alleyways or something like that, but then you're looking at a security issue as well. You want these to be safe and presentable, and so staff's weighing these kind of options.
And at the same time, we're talking about beautifying the downtown and doing all these, plants and things like that, and then boom, here's a porta potty. It just, I think it's kind of contradictory. So
Yeah, I don't think there are too many people, unless you own the business, that are fans of porta potties. But Alderman Sage.
Maybe there's a way to put those near a mural or something where they kind of then blend in. It looks like a 3D. Hey, Bob, you and I haven't talked about this, but I've talked about it with a few people. Do we have an app for downtown?
I'd have to turn to my Bloomington.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking, just in terms of, and again, I was reminded by Jamie's comments about the international visitor, where, I mean, and I'm wondering, it doesn't have to be obviously real fancy to start with, but I'm wondering if there's not an opportunity for an intern to do, we could get an intern in here for a semester to get something up, or even if it's just static in the sense of here's parking, here's public restrooms, here's our restaurants, here's our top 10 points of interest downtown or whatever it is, and then something built on a platform that then gives us an opportunity to kind of add some functionality onto it where they can touch things and get some pop-ups or drill to another screen or something like that.
Well, we've had the opportunity to attend DBA meetings, and that's something that certainly should go on the next agenda. And we do have interns at the Downtown Development Division, so we'll look into those.
Yeah, and again, we're not talking Amazon here, right? We're talking just some type of an entry level. Let's get it out, and whether it, like I said, it doesn't have to be real dynamic necessarily. Even if it's more static, at least something that we can scroll around with move around on a map and identify parking and that type of stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Alderman Mathey.
Well, since you gave me such an incredible segue, I'm going to take the opportunity to run with it. A bunch of us went to the Regional Planning Commission's breakfast on smart cities last week, and it's gotten me thinking about a bunch of different stuff we can do. And so starting with an app as a very simple thing that we can do, but I think that there's just a lot of other stuff we can do, again, basing my idea and concepts around tourism and festivals and things of that nature. Some of the stuff that they talked about, and I think we already have a majority of downtown Bloomington covered in Wi-Fi right now, but it's locked down. We use it for various things. It's private for city use as well, but that could be one of the things we do is we make a portion of the available bandwidth available for public use. Bloomington Wi-Fi, if somebody connects to that, it launches a splash page that says, welcome to downtown Bloomington. Hey, by the way, we have an app that is going to provide you with a ton of information about what we provide available in downtown. That might tie into informational kiosks, which the gentleman from Kansas City was talking about. They had kiosks that showed you, here's where you're at, here are services that are available, restaurants, parking, public services, everything you wanted to know. And those were washrooms, and those were effectively paid for by advertising dollars, kind of the same way as our bus system is starting to do some advertising on the back of the buses. I think that there's a whole bunch of things that we can tie into this entire concept around, a smart city, as long as we start planning now and taking the steps, because Jim's about to tear up all the streets, or some form of all the streets, and so putting in conduit, fiber, and all the stuff that we need to do while we already have the streets open is way cheaper than if we decide afterwards, and it'll look cleaner as well. I think there's just a lot of little things that we can do to identify maybe downtowns where we start at and say, this is our destination area, this is our tourism area that we can capture people's attention with, and here's where we start. And then we say, it could even have, the app could have things, by the way, if you've seen all the stuff that you want to see in downtown Bloomington, here's historic Franklin Park, or here's how to get to the David Davis Mansion, or Tipton Trails and all of our parks and recs. It's a segue off of all those things. So it starts small, but a long-term plan, it gets much bigger, and there are more things that we can do where it applies to not just international tourists, but our own residents who, we were in a meeting and the residents said that they didn't know that we had an ice rink. And this was in December, and she said, how do you find out about ice rinks? And we're like, well, it's in every Parks and Rec book that gets mailed out. anyway, people here don't know what we have. So, it could be all things, I think, if we start small. I like your idea of starting small.
We had talked many times about, the value of the work plan, and that's something Tricia and I have been Main Streeters, and doing a work plan is part of the 4-point approach to downtown revitalization. And I think what it does, it forces you to focus. And although it does allow you the flexibility to add new projects, it basically says these are the ones we're going to accomplish. And you have the benchmarks in front of you to say, get it done. And so that's kind of why we're working from this standpoint on having you look at a work plan to see that we can kind of force ourselves to accomplish these tasks. So if you wanted to do a rolling work plan to add these extra items, we certainly could do that as well for future years. And that.
Go ahead, Bob, continue.
So we wanted to go through the areas of opportunity. We hit public restrooms, public recycling bins. There's a timeline for that. We talked about empowering the Historic Preservation Commission. I think this is one that staff...
Yeah, if we could just go to the recycling. This is something Alderman Schmidt and I, almost 5 years ago, have talked about. It's this, how complicated could it be to get a few, it doesn't have to be that many. Even if it's like 3, I think, just like they have in Uptown Normal, where you have trash as well as recycling bins.
I'll
Jim.
be honest with you, we kind of pushed it back a little bit. We probably need to push it forward.
This is an easy one in the fact that thanks to the Ecology Action Center, Michael Brown, we actually are applying for a grant that will give us 50-50 coverage on 4 additional ones right around the square. And then we will then start with that and then continue to work our way out in conjunction with the existing system we have. So our thanks to them for finding that. We think that's a step in the right direction. And even if we don't get the grant, we'll still be able to get a couple. So by the end of the summer, we will have something up.
Okay. And the same thing, I think, with Venue Works in the Coliseum. I think our initial... I did. Okay, I'm sorry.
And that's in keeping, just to focus on that, the Ecology Action Center did a report. This is important to not bypass this. They had an intern do a report on what would they look like and what are the costs. And so they did an evaluative process on what different options are there for recycling in the downtown. And we were looking at ones that are very similar in style with the current receptacles that we have for garbage. So they will be a natural fit. They're not going to be ugly. They will match the same kind of theme that we have. So we think that's a positive thing.
Alderwoman Burgess.
Can we see that report?
Yes.
Just for our information.
It was included in a council meal. It was like months ago. So we will resend it out. We'll gladly. Yeah. So it was one of those probably buried in something. So we'll resend it out again this week in the city manager's weekly report. We'll include that to all of the council. It's a great report, and it includes all of the different types of options for recycling containers in the downtown. Doesn't give locations. It gives the different types of options, and so we'll make sure that the council gets that.
Thank you.
Did we hit recycling?
I think we hit recycling.
So we also talked about the Historic Preservation Commission. I think staff's a little skittish about the recommendation that the entire downtown be an S4 district. I think, although we want to support preservation in the downtown, I'm not sure that, that we can get that solid cooperation from all our business and property owners in the downtown, but it's something that we should work for in the future. So, but there is a timeline for working with preservation within your work plan. The zoning changes to support downtown development, we should be taking our final versions to the Planning Commission in late May, and then we hope to have that for review, and then through the remainder of the summer and fall, we'll be able to adopt that ordinance. I guess really we'll have to work with legal on when we want to have the implementation date of our zoning ordinances.
And we're on page 10, just so that everybody knows.
We're on page 10, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Bob, can I add on to that one? I think that in addition to that, just as important is that we start an education process for, a better way to say it, I don't have a better way to say it, but maybe for retailers, again, so now going back to an EDC dinner from last year, one of the things that they were talking about at the EDC dinner, I can't remember the guy's name, Roger something, he was talking about that the most successful downtowns in the revitalization have standardized hours, similar to malls. He was pointing out that there's a reason why malls enforce that every business must stay open till 9 o'clock at night, because a significant portion of shopping happens from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. And, that's one of the challenges that we have right now, unfortunately, is we have retailers who are closed on Sundays. And so if we're moving towards a tourism model, we need those. Sunday is a huge day for tourism, especially for Route 66 travelers. And, there's 5 businesses in the entire downtown right now that are open on Sundays, if there's 5. So maybe part of going with this zoning changes to support that core is that same zone, that new core zone needs to have support inside of it for an education of saying this is why you need to be open. We all need to make this commitment together to, if we're going to move towards a certain direction, we all have to be on the same page, and there has to be more than 1 or 2 people scattered around. Make Monday your day that you're closed, or whatever, something else, a different day. But I think that those 2 things, that educational component, need to go hand in hand in there at the same time, as well as maybe, in our downtown task force meeting, we talked about a way to try to incentivize property owners to making sure that retail is on the first floor. Retail or services are on the first floor of all those buildings in that core zone, where we're looking at what is the first and best use of those buildings. Unfortunately, right now, we have a lot of those buildings that are professional services, and they're great, and they're wonderful customers if you're a property owner, but they do not help any long-term tourism or economic goals. So, thank you.
Thanks. Alderman Sage.
Thank you. Bob, maybe just a suggestion related to item 6, the adopted zoning changes. I noticed that in the above item 5, we've referenced in the coordination column long-term. You've listed the DBA there, and so perhaps maybe consider a couple of maybe minor revisions, if you will.
Yep. No, that's good.
Maybe look at engaging DBA a little bit earlier in the process in number 5. So that way then we have private property owners involved, right? Because all I see here are city staff people.
Right.
Okay. And then again, related to that, for item number 6, maybe add DBA in there somewhere. They have ownership and it's important to make sure those voices are heard, right?
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Alderman Lomboy.
Okay. Thank you. Bob, I know, we're talking about historic preservation here and zoning, but I was kind of curious because somebody was asking me about the front and center building, and I was wondering if that fits into historic preservation or it's something that...
It's actually within the Downtown National Register District, but it does not have historic status as a local landmark.
Because I know there's quite a bit of concern about the building and how much is an eyesore, and so I don't know what we do about that, about buildings that are
dilapidated.
Dilapidated, and also helping to depress property values in the areas. And I think we need to have a more aggressive approach. If we're trying to beautify the downtown, we can't let that go.
We have done enforcement efforts on that building in the past, roofing and boarding up and that type of thing, but I understand where you're at with that.
And we have gotten, at least with our current code, right? The building is technically in our current code. You could change the code, you could move toward eminent domain, there's any number of things that we have as options.
It is within a TIF district when we have some powers associated with that, so there's some things we can do.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, people are getting antsy, I think. It's been a while now.
Mr. Mulumby, we've gotten that same concern from a number of different members of the City Council, and so as a staff, we're working on that, and we're going to bring something back to you.
Right. Bob?
So to finish up, the wayfinding signage, The committee has gone out to bid, and we're continuing to work on that, and then the overall one on modernizing infrastructure. So I guess just to close up the discussion this evening, I'll certainly will let you have some more questions, but what we're looking for is if you're interested in providing some feedback on the work plan, whether that's timelines or some considerations on which projects are priorities or whether there should be projects that should drop off. The real intent is that although staff has been continuing to work on these projects, we want to make sure that there's a commitment from the council for us to continue on our work. So,
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. And Bob, again, that was a nice segue into what I was going to ask. What I would suggest is that maybe staff offer some tools or some mechanism or some process for council to provide that feedback.
Okay.
Right? Whether it's a rating system or something else like that. And we don't have to have the entire work plan prioritized. Probably what's maybe more important is to have what's nearer the top rather than what's at the entire priority list.
Would you be comfortable if we sent that out for comment and then you provide maybe some sort of, we'll come up with some system?
Yeah. I mean, whether what are the top three, of the 8 or 9 or whatever that are here,
right.
And then within that section, I mean.
I would say this: all of them are doable. It's just how quickly we want to move through them.
Right, and so I'll leave the how part of that up to you. The what I'm suggesting is give us a rating system to give you, so that otherwise you're just going to have this whole conglomeration of feedback, and you're going to have trouble probably trying to sift through it and discern anything valuable out of it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Alderman Burgess and then Millowamboy.
Mr. Martin, you're just answering one of my questions, which is this all achievable? And you said, yes, it is all achievable.
Mm-hmm.
So I might suggest that it may be simpler for staff to operate under the assumption that council supports everything in this potential work plan, absent any potential feedback. So I think if we try to do a rating system, that might get very confusing in a hurry. So is someone's, if it's down low on your ratings, does that mean you wouldn't support it at all? Or would you support it if other people did? And that gets kind of mushy. And I don't want to hinder what I see tonight as very positive, exciting forward progress. We're seeing results in our downtown area. We're seeing things moving forward in a way that we haven't before. This is really nicely done, I think. I might have some small comments, but on the whole, it's really well put together, and it gives us those things we haven't had before, measurable outcomes, benchmarks, accountability, both on you and on us, which is really important. I'm glad that you're bringing this to us and saying, and telling us what you need in order to move downtown forward. It's really exciting to see how much the departments now are collaborating on downtown. And I assume that's been a little bumpy at times as we work that out, but I think this plan helps to solidify who's responsible for what, and that's really exciting because there's so much we can do. And of course, this focuses on the majority of the task force recommendations, which were focused on those quicker, easier things that we can do to improve downtown in a meaningful way in the short term, in the short to near term. We're talking 3 to 5 years. What is missing from this conversation is the other element of the Downtown Task Force report, which is okay because it feels like a separate conversation. It really does, and that is the idea of catalyst projects. And we haven't gotten there yet as a council to have that conversation. And I think that has made a lot of sense because, again, these projects that we can achieve in the short term really do need to take priority. However, I hope that we as a council do not overlook the fact that that while it's wonderful to have these programs and initiatives that will improve downtown's appearance and make it a much nicer place for those people who already use it, if we really want to take downtown to the next level, if we really want to make downtown a fully revitalized area, we have to bring more people in on a daily basis. And, will beautification help there? Yes. But will it help the same as, other potential larger projects we could do? I think the answer is unequivocally no. So we need to be focused there. And I hope that also we can have a sense of urgency in that conversation because some of our issues in the downtown area are not going away, and they will only accelerate and get worse with time. And there is a reason that the Market Street block was a focus of the Downtown Task Force Tier 1 recommendation, and that's because that is unique in all the problem areas we have in downtown because we literally own it. And it's amazing to me, well, not amazing is the wrong word, that would not convey what I'm hoping to convey, but we need to have that sense of urgency because this is a long-standing problem. I mean, I was doing some research last week and found an article from 2010 with council struggling with what to do with the aging Market Street parking deck. It could have been written today. So, you know, I'm rambling a little bit tonight, and I apologize for that. But, you know, number one, most important thing is excellent job on this work. Number two, I think as a council, we still have some work to do when it comes to revitalization of the downtown area.
Alderman Wamboy and then Sage.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I do like this because you find a way to operationalize some of the things that the council gives you up here, and you kind of break it down in a way that's a little bit more manageable. What would be more helpful to me before I can offer an opinion is to kind of get an idea of cost, on some of these things, because when I don't know, I'm just not quite sure, which I would pick. I mean, some things sound attractive, but if I don't know how much it costs, I'm not sure I would go with it. And I also, kind of in a similar vein, I'd like to know if we take on certain things, because you said it's achievable, all of them are achievable, but yet we know that resources are limited, particularly staff time. So are there things in here that if you took this on, what would have to be dropped off, pushed aside, or delayed? I'd like to know that before I can make a decision.
Alderman Sage.
Thanks, Mboka, because that was I guess a follow-up comment I was going to make, and that is I'm not prepared to say I endorse everything in this plan right now for a couple different reasons, and Mboka having touched on one, right, is cost. And again, to his point, we say something's achievable, but from a SMART goal perspective, it may not be realistic, right? So we need to have a little bit, in my opinion, and maybe that's part of the feedback you might solicit from the council, is, are you in favor of some aggregate kind of blanket approval of this whole thing, or try to identify some specific parts of this to seek some prioritization and feedback, maybe that way. The other thing, Bob, I would encourage is maybe for staff, and there'll be a few people still around, the gold standard I've seen for work plans and implementation plans is the West Bloomington Revitalization Program. That was an outstanding document that was put together a number of years ago, and the line of sight that was created through that, roles, responsibilities, and so forth, and Karen would surely remember that too, is again, it might provide some useful reference points or some handholds and footholds for you and your staff to maybe tie back into, or again, it was something that you could put on the table, and staff, citizens, stakeholders, everybody could kind of look at that and understand who was doing it and when it was happening and so forth.
Well, I'm getting through my library of reading material, so that'd be one I put on my list.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, anything else, Bob?
No.
Jim?
Well, this can be very easy, or it can be a longer conversation. That is up to you. So the conversation is going to revolve around Jefferson, from center to main. Staff loved this as one of our favorite photos, so we were going to dwell on this for just a second because it's beautiful. So the conversation really for us is what do we do with resurfacing, or do we resurface or not between center and main? That's the question tonight. We've got a lot of different information about shared space model and then other options that were discussed. But what we're really looking for is whether this summer, next week on April 23rd, we're going to be bringing to the council our resurfacing plan for this summer. It includes Jefferson Street from center to main. Now, what we don't want to do, it also includes Front Street, by the way. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to resurface very needed streets. just horrible shape. I mean, they're rated 3s. They're just, that's the technical term, is horrible shape. And so they really need to be resurfaced and addressed. But what we don't want to do is put down nice, wonderful, brand new street just to tear it back up. That is, as a staff, we have made very concerted efforts to not do that, and so we want to try to not do that here as well. So in summary, the two different options, it would have cost about $35,000 for us to mill and fill this area of Jefferson. It's about 200 feet long, and the right-of-way is 66 feet wide. So what we are looking to do is, then the other option we could have is we don't resurface it. We continue to do some research. I can show you tonight some different options. We can talk about that. There was some good, healthy dialogue about shared space models and the like. But the question was, what actions do we take? Well, public outreach, some public meetings. We do some additional research. There's quite a bit of research out there. And so we look at what that means. We have public meetings through the Transportation Commission, Planning Commission. So there's a lot of work that we can do. The DBA. City Manager Rasmussen did speak with the DBA, and they were supportive of resurfacing this block. That's important to note. But again, some of that depends upon, what do we do moving forward. We could look to resurface other blocks and come back to this in the future. We have been making also efforts on Front Street. Staff actually is probably more supportive of backing off of Jefferson than we are of Front. And part of that is because of the Connect Transit, the current moving them off of Front. We don't see that in the immediate future. We really need to do Front Street. And so staff is really recommending, that's why you're not going to see a lot of dialogue on Front Street. We can have it if you want, but from a staff perspective, we really recommend we move forward with that. We'd rather the conversation center around Jefferson. And why? Because, well, for one, we can talk about the Downtown Task Force, the report. The pieces out of that did talk about, in quotes, that shared space model for us talking about that. The Downtown Task Force report also talked about crosswalks. Do you have that in with brick, stamped concrete? You also could have decorative crosswalks. There's a lot of different options we could have. The comprehensive plan, this on Jefferson Street directly deals with our comprehensive plan of multimodal quality infrastructure, which I love, of course. Moving on, we talk about efficient networks. Again, this multimodal complete streets concept. It's all in our comprehensive plan. All this ties together. I want you to know that even if we were to resurface this block, it's not as if it would take out complete streets. This block is actually part of our bicycle master plan. The ADT is about almost 1,600 vehicles. The recommendation, though, in this area is shared lane markings. And we used to call them SHAROs. The terminology has changed. So shared lane markings is kind of that, what we'd be looking at. And I can show you some pictures of that. But all across Jefferson, from Lee all the way to the trail, is marked on the bicycle master plan for us to address with those shared lane markings. So we're planning on doing that regardless of what unless we change some of how that accommodation is for bicycles. But we were already planning on that, and along Front Street. Front, it's already there, but obviously we'd be putting that back as part of our existing bicycle master plan.
Jim, if I could just to clarify, is that the only reason why this might be an issue is if there was support on the council for if we were to close off Jefferson, that could be done regardless whether it's asphalt or brick. It's if we were to close off that section of Jefferson and also say we want it to be brick.
Correct.
Otherwise, this is not really an issue then.
Otherwise, it's not really, no matter what we do, we're looking to have additional multimodal accommodations in this block. So the conversation, we'll get to that in a second for the different options, but that is correct.
Let me clarify that just a little bit too. The question that we're struggling with is, do we want to put new asphalt down there this summer and issue that bid out next week, and then come back with a plan to do a shared street or something and might have to tear that up, and then we would all look dumb for having put that out? Or do we want to say, maybe we'll do the shared street next year or the next year or maybe a long time in the future, and the street needs to be resurfaced now? If I can cut to the chase scene, the Downtown Bloomington Association and I think the Public Works Department want to move forward with recommending that we do the overlay now, and that we work later on what we may do with a shared street or a pedestrian plaza or something, but that the street needs to be done now. and we would like to get your feedback on that, and I think that's really where we're headed with
But
this.
just to clarify on that, is that, at least as I'm understanding it, we could have a plaza there where Jefferson is covered with asphalt.
That's exactly right.
And it
Asphalt doesn't preclude that.
In fact, we could, I forgot who suggested maybe we do a trial, maybe it was Alderman Black. You could take two wooden horses as they do on Beale Street every night in Memphis, and every night they close it off. And, you know, that's, I'm not saying that we do it every night, or maybe we do it for a 60-day trial period or 30 days, whatever that might be, and then see what that impact might be, even if we go through as currently planned and asphalt over it.
Jim, would you also address the brick issue? I think you did some trial borings there.
And so there's a few different things we've got going. I'll address the brick, then I'll come back to costs, so ignore the screen for a second or else you'll get distracted. So for bricks, I was honestly disappointed. I'll be honest, I was really hoping for a cost-effective solution. Our staff approached us and said, hey, we think there's brick under there. You know, why don't we look like we did over on Grove Street? Let's see if we can peel that brick back. There might even be some interurban rails that we used to have from a historic nature. Let's see if we can peel that back. We might have a very cost-effective solution. We just have to do some patching. It would be beautiful. We might be able to do that around the square. We, as a staff, we were getting a little excited, to be quite honest. We thought this might be a really great win from a very cost-effective perspective. But we failed and it was just not there. We did cores. Our staff did some cores of that pavement cross-section in the Jefferson Street area, and there was actually no brick between Center and Main. Of the 3 cores that we did, there were 0 bricks. Now, there might, again, we didn't do a comprehensive. It was 3 spots, places that were done by a contractor that cored down, and there just weren't bricks in those areas. We know to the east, just north of the State Farm Building, you can actually see some of the brick. The asphalt's peeling up, so that's what got us excited, thinking it'll probably be here too, and it just wasn't. So that's unfortunate. So that eliminated one of the successes we were hoping to come to you with a kind of a good alternative win, but that didn't happen. So let's talk about some costs. The other thing that we're talking about.
We've got some aldermen here who want to speak. If I have Alderman Burgess, Matthew, Sage, and Black.
Yeah, I just had a question. I want to make sure I understand the parameters that we're talking about here. We're only talking about the 100 block of Jefferson, correct?
Correct.
So no matter what we do with the 100 block, would the 200, 300 block still be resurfaced this year?
We'd like that to happen, yes. Regardless of what happens with the 100 block of Jefferson between Center and Main, we are still resurfacing Jefferson, the rest of it.
Okay, Matthew, Sage, and Black.
That was actually my exact question, is I just want to make sure we all talked about the 100. And couldn't we just redo everything else if we skip that one for now?
And we are looking right now, just so you know, and you'll see this next week, but Prairie to Lee is the area that we're looking at. And so that's the area that, for Jefferson, again, that is moving forward, assuming your vote next week occurs in the affirmative. That's what's been bid out.
Alderman Sage.
So, Steve, thank you, because I think you tried to bring us back to more the question that's on the table, right? And that is, what are we going to do about the 100 block this year? Are we going to mill and fill? Or are we going to patch for another year? Is basically kind of the 2 options, right? And so what, and the staff recommendation, and I'm checking my understanding, was that go ahead and repave that block on the north side of the square this year.
And then we'll deal with the issue of how we may do a shared street in conjunction with already having resurfaced it.
And again, you guys are smarter about this than I am, but if we were to turn that into, say, a green space, well then the average daily trip, the traffic volumes and things, those would simply be driven over pushed onto other streets, right? And then we accelerate, potentially deterioration and such on those streets as well. And so are you looking for definitively that feedback from the council tonight on pave it this year in conjunction with the entire run?
We're looking for a yes or no.
Proposed?
Yes, we are, and what we'll do is we'll get your sensing tonight, and based on that, we'll bring back the bid for you on Monday based upon what we hear from you tonight.
And the reason I ask is I know one of the conversations that was brought up at the downtown task force meeting, I did attend one, and was the idea that we had some people here who said, they had been in some other cities where something like that was just converted to a green space. Mm-hmm. That entire section of pavement would be converted to green space. And so I didn't know if that was still in play, or if now we're just talking about something that it was going to be paved over with asphalt.
I could answer that.
Go ahead.
If we resurface,
sure,
we'd be asking to not then waste the money that we'd spent resurfacing. If there's any desire by the council's part to do any alternative surface, now is the time for us to say, hold the horses, let's do more of that 1 year long assessment with the big robust feedback from people. So this is that go, no go time that we're asking for feedback.
And again, I'm sure it's going to be more cost effective to do that whole run at one time from Lee to Prairie or whatever it was you suggested, than it would be to knock off that one block and then come back later and do it, right? So I guess what I'm leading up to is I wasn't sure I was prepared to give that type of specific feedback tonight, because I want to make sure I understand what all the options are, and then perhaps what are kind of the ramifications of those. Because if we convert it to green space, we're going to drive all that traffic onto other streets that are also deteriorating, right? If we repave it, it seems to me it would be cost effective now to do it, as part of that Lee to Prairie run and be done with it. And then, as Terry suggested, then you could maybe do some things at night to be able to use that asphalted area, on Jefferson as more of a community gathering point or a place there. I mean, so I guess I'm just looking for some additional conversation.
Yes, that's a very important point. I want the council to know clearly that I am pushing the staff forward hard to do work on the downtown soon. We've come to this one point, however, because one of these things, which is not really a catalyst project, but it would be a major change to what we do downtown, and it moves in the direction of downtown parkland. But if we overlay it, and we do this with the rest of the overlay, it has the sensing that we've kind of delayed that, and we're not moving forward with that because we've overlaid it and we've got a street on there and it's back to business as usual. So we'd like to see which way the council would like to move on that, and I think what I would suggest is that we can go ahead and overlay it because it needs that to be done. The staff would like to do that, Public Works, the Downtown Bloomington Association, but what happens is we know that behind that is that we're going to be doing something with Jefferson Street in terms of a shared street or something in accordance with the task force plan, and that then just may come in a year or two, and we'll do it around the fact that we've overlaid it. And if you come back and say, staff was really dumb for doing that, well, guilty is charged.
Just as a clarification, there is no vote tonight. It would just be a sense of the council. If the council wanted to mull this over, obviously we can mull it over and over and over, but this is scheduled to come a week from tonight for an actual vote. But if I could just clarify for the record, if, regardless of whether or not let's say it is turned into hypothetically, some form, whether it's temporary or we try it for evenings or we just try it for a 30-day period or whatever it might be, maybe even it's just with sawhorses we go on the cheap. But whatever that is, paving it over eliminates two options. One that Alderman Sage has referred to, and that is a green space, or makes it more costly, or brick, and now that you've done some boring, we're not even really sure that there's brick under there.
Yes, we know that there's not brick in 3 different locations, that's right, so there's probably not that much brick there, that's correct.
But
we could
putting
put down
asphalt on there does not preclude any option, shifting perspectives, from possibly doing a trial or a long-term
that's true.
In terms of closing off part of the square.
That is accurate.
Are those statements safe?
Those statements are accurate from the standpoint of that you can still put up bollards to isolate off if you wanted to completely shut down traffic. You could still put decorative crosswalks. You could still, go in and make modifications. It's just the street will be asphalt. It won't be cobblestone or brick or grass. So that is correct. You could still do that. Staff is just saying if you're going to do that, we'd rather use that block of money somewhere else that's very needed in our community.
Okay. But go back to Alderman
But
Sage.
to your point, Terry, I mean, we already do that now. I know when I've been down there, like for the GLT concert and some other things,
Oh,
we close it off now, and so we know that works, right? So,
Right.
So the question, or is maybe the question more of, because again, I want to make sure that as much as possible, I've captured all the aspects of this, right? We turn it into green space, then does that penalize some of the businesses on that side, of the square? Whereas if we simply pave over it now, we get the long contiguous run, from Lee to Prairie. We can still close it off in the evening, and it keeps access open to businesses along that north side of the square. So I guess, Steve, I'll just say some feedback from me. I would say, yeah, let's just go ahead and pave it now. But
Okay.
to give you the feedback that you're looking for.
Thank you.
In terms of order here, I think I wrote this down in a previous iteration, but I'm going to go back to Alderman Black and Burgess. I guess I'm down to two. Oh, and then Maffey.
Thank you, Jim. So to answer Steve's question, I think it should just be paved over at this time, and namely because I have no interest in having that plaza be brick. I don't want to have the conversation about ADA and how we're able to move folks around there effectively, and I think you would have the same types of challenges with grass or that type of green space. I think asphalt will give us, if it's closed off, the opportunity to have that plaza, and if the council 10 years from now decides that they want to tear that up and turn it into green space, they will then know. I'm uncomfortable making such a long-reaching decision, without kind of specifics on what that will look like. And, I don't. You'll probably hear me say this again, but the sense that I have and that I'm getting from the community is that we need to do something different downtown. The status quo isn't acceptable. And what's worked in the past may have worked in the past, but we have a new community with new dynamic changes going on with our downtown, our overall economic structure. And this, to me, by just paving it over with asphalt, doesn't limit our options. Perhaps it does in the short term, but in the long term, we're not going to make these decisions by the 23rd of April.
Sorry, Scott, I didn't hear the first part, but you said you're in favor of paving over it
Yeah,
now?
and what we can do at that point in time is we can still close it off. We can do it on a temporary basis. We've done it for concerts. We've done it for other things. But I would envision that being a more lengthy than just, say a 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. I'm thinking like we try a month of it closed off.
Yeah, I was just throwing out a few ideas, meaning let's see how it does. We can start it on the cheap.
Yes.
And let's just see how it works,
and
whether it's temporary for every day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we're all on the same page here. And I'll just be clear as part of this conversation, and I may reference this at some point again, I'm asking for staff to be creative in these new solutions. And I've been really happy with what I've seen tonight with the different action plans and timelines. And if some of these things don't work, you know that I'm going to have your back when that comes, because I am voting on these things because we can't continue what we currently have. I know that Terry will be there and this council will be there. So, I want to give staff the room to explore and try something new so we can actually make a dramatic change. And if it requires us to make these types of adjustments here and there, I am more than willing to do it. I hope that answers your question about this piece. Thank you.
Alderwoman Burgess, Maffey, and Howman.
Can you go back to that photo?
Let's see. I will keep going back, and you can tell me which photo.
The one that was in the task force report.
Got it.
All right, that one. All right, first of all, when the task force was out and about and we were presenting our presentation, this photo got more comments than any other photo, and they were unanimously positive. Just by background, for those of you on the council, people really liked this. And this is just one example of a shared street. And what worries me about the comments we just heard is you are making a decision based on something that is not actually the recommendation that was made by the Downtown Task Force. The Downtown Task Force did not recommend that we close off the 100 block of Jefferson Street to make a public plaza. That is not the recommendation. Now, if you want to have that conversation, cool, let's do it. But that is not the recommendation. The recommendation is something very different, and that is this notion of a shared street model, which is a lot of communities are turning toward, as I learned through our work on the task force, away from pedestrian malls because people haven't been satisfied with them. The local businesses aren't happy with shutting down traffic. So they're looking at different opportunities in that area, and it could be all brick. It could be a combination of brick and asphalt. There are so many different models. I think it's really, really difficult for us, the council right now, to make any final conclusions on whether we're interested in that or not, because there are just so many different options, which is one reason I personally was very excited about this recommendation, is because it's so flexible. We can make it meet the needs of our community and what that looks like. And certainly the 100 block of Jefferson offers an opportunity for us to try out something different. You know, it's a single block, it's along the History Museum, and it could be something very interesting. I don't know what that looks like. You know, here's one picture. You give me 20 minutes, I'll give you a dozen more, right? And I know you've looked at that too, Jim. They're just possibilities are almost, well, not completely endless. It's still a flat surface. I mean, but I think we need to better understand what that could look like before we can make a final decision. But, you know, when it comes to paving that particular area, I'm reticent to say let's do that. And I understand that it's a rational decision. I understand that very likely it's the, you know, from downtown's perspective, that's the safe decision, right? Because there's no guarantee if we don't pave it this year that we'll ever come back and do anything. But I think from an accountability perspective, from a getting things done perspective, if we choose to delay resurfacing in that area, we put the pressure on ourselves. We are answerable then for what we do or do not do. And I think that's what we need at this point in time. So I personally think, you know, we go with a little bit without a net and see what happens, but keep that pressure on and look towards something new and creative in that area.
Excuse me. I put my glasses back on. Alderman Matthey is next.
So, I was just been trying to figure out how I want to say this. So, I never envisioned that it would be green space either. I always thought it'd be, you know, some sort of pavement, be that concrete, asphalt, or something. And to me, from what I was thinking about was the difference is not so much the material that it's made of, but how it's actually designed. Right now, it's a traditional street, big curbs and big sewer inlets, and we got some tree wells and stuff of that nature. And I was thinking about how that street is used every Saturday for farmers market. And if we go more to looking at what those shared street models are, they're not necessarily designed that same way, where it's maybe just a little mild depression to move the water, like
Argyle
this picture
Street
exactly.
in Chicago is a good example, a few years old.
Yeah, but you don't have the big, sewers or curbs and gutters that people could potentially trip over when you're moving around booths at farmers market or at WGLT summer concerts or whatever might have closed off the street if we're looking for that. It's more of enough of an indentation to move some water around and give people a guidance way. So is there a way where we can still say we want to move forward with repaving that street, but we're going to change the way that it could be asphalt as far as I'm concerned, but if we change how the curb and gutter works to make it more like this versus being brick pavers or stamped concrete or anything of that nature. Does that make sense?
It does. It is very difficult in the historic downtown area from a money perspective with where the buildings will land and where the entryways are. If you look up at Argyle Street, that's a few years old. They have a shared street model they've been working on, and some of the things that we're noticing, you know, they have permeable pavers, but they're already some of the things that we're seeing is they're already adding additional bollards to differentiate, walkable areas from the driving areas. They even put out an educational video on how to drive the street. And so from a staff perspective, we also want to see how some of that works. There's how much water, where does the water go? And that's also whenever you have some slight depressions, we want to make sure that water gets away and doesn't go into buildings, for example. example. The other facet that folks are commenting about Argyle Street is how will autonomous vehicles work? We want to make sure the markings are very easy to see. Those are some things that we look at, and we know what's coming. It's going to radically change things when we talk about autonomous vehicles. And all this can be accommodated. It really can. It's just money and time and how we incorporate some of our businesses also in these decisions. So it really is. I think the comment was made very, you're right. It's the easy answer just to resurface it. The more comprehensive answer takes a lot of time, and it can take a lot of dialogue in it, and it can potentially cost quite a bit of money that we don't know all of the different ramifications. As a staff, we were brainstorming about all sorts of different options, such as even widening out the sidewalk and making a really wide sidewalk for 23-foot wide sidewalk as opposed to 14, so you could have all sorts of take away the parking and make it all these great areas for people to walk. And so there's a endless amount of things you can do. It's a matter of, Alderman Sage, when you talked about to understand a lot of those, all of the different options, we really struggled. We said, I've got more slides up here than I have time to show. We really brainstormed about a lot of things, but it comes down to what do we have the ability to do with the resources that we have and the timing that we have, given the condition of the pavement. And so, in the end, that's why staff was recommending to move forward at this time with the current plan as it is. Not taking away the fact that maybe in the future that continued dialogue in the downtown can change things. I mean, unfortunately, maybe in 15 years from now, we can work on other streets in the downtown, and when the next resurfacing in 20 years, hopefully more, we come back again, maybe the rest of the downtown, we can continue this dialogue and we can have a clear vision about where we're going. But in the meantime, as a staff, we were just trying to move the ball forward in the downtown. We still like trying to get these good wins that we've been having as far as bump outs that are attainable from a cost perspective as well.
As I understand, Alderman Matthey, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a version of some of what Amelia was suggesting, and I think what we've been hearing is that as you're paving it, maybe there's a slight bump out for drainage or whatever, so that it would be conducive to not just a GLT summer concert, but if we decided to close it off. Is that correct?
Yes-ish.
Yes-ish. Okay.
So, all right, let's say we move ahead because it's cost-effective, and we pave it, and we're doing it pretty much the same as it looks right now, just less holes. I'm just kind of thinking like, okay, in the future, do you think we could modify into it by flattening out some of those curves and lead into what we're doing right now? And
see, that can be done. We've been doing that at Mulberry in Maine, and we've been doing that across the downtown. We've been making more of the bump outs, more decorative. We've been incorporating that streetscape master plan, and that's where I really think those are some beautifying ways to improve the downtown. That I think folks already, we've gotten so much positive feedback. On Front Street, already people are starting to see what we're doing over by Rosie's, and people are really appreciative of those improvements. So yes, that's doable. Very doable now.
So just a couple more quick thoughts on this is, one of the things I thought of in terms of if we wanted to close it down is if we get new planters for the self-watering planters for in front of the businesses, maybe we could pick out the best of the remaining tippable round planters and use those, and those could be movable green space. I mean, because there's been trees planted in those things, fairly large trees, so we could actually plant trees, and those could be moved around as we want them to open and close that space. Not too often, because trust me, I know they're from firsthand experience, they're very heavy. But that's one way to do it. The other thing, and you know where I'm at on this, is conduit and handholds in this whole stretch of area to make sure that nobody digs the street up again, right? We know that we've got 5 different fiber optic providers competing in the area, and every time we turn around, they dig a new hole, they bust out a new piece of concrete in the sidewalks. Can we put conduit and handholds in front of every one of those properties in place now so they're not going to dig them up in the future? I know it's a little bit of additional cost on us, but instead of them digging it up, we could say, no, right there, that's your assigned conduit. Use that one, route it over to the handhold, go into the business that way instead of digging up our new street that we just put in.
For the most part, a lot of the fiber optic companies bore at this point, and that's actually some of the problems we've been having, like on Monroe. But we are planning on putting in some conduit to address street lighting issues. The problem is to make it large enough to be able to accommodate any possible thing that could go in the downtown. That's part of our struggle. So you're right on some of that. We're struggling with the how do you size that to know what will be needed in the future. The other facet of some of what you're talking about is those vertical differences. I think somebody else had talked about tall curbs in the downtown. You know, they really were. They used to be very, you know, they were historically very high curbs, and so there is a very large vertical difference that we'd have to overcome if we ever wanted that to be a true shared space. The last facet is it does keep mentioning shutting down that street. From a staff perspective too, I do want to just address that. At least we haven't seen a lot of positive, some of the research that's been done by some of our staff, there's not a lot of positive input across the nation. There was in the 90s a big push for pedestrian malls that they've gone away from. The more of that shared space is where people are moving to, those pedestrian malls, you have to have a lot of pedestrian traffic to really make it worth it for the businesses. So I just, as a council, that quick touch point to let you know that's what we've seen.
Okay. The tiniest little follow-up then is we should go to the 5 companies we know are bearing fiber and saying, if you have any plans, work with us right now before you tear it up. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Got it. Alderman Howman, Maboka, and Schmidt.
Thanks. I'm just curious, and I don't know if Tricia might know this or maybe even Tim, have we talked to the businesses that front onto Jefferson to know if what their thoughts are in terms of possibly closing this off temporarily, permanently, as a test? Whatever.
That's an excellent question, Diana. And actually, the Downtown Development Department hasn't had the opportunity to do that, but that was definitely one of the recommendations of the Downtown Bloomington Association at their last meeting when we discussed, you know, in the short term, going ahead and making the structural improvements or the asphalt that Jefferson Street needs, but in the long term, be planning public conversations and charrettes to be building what this will look like to get the public input from heritage enterprises and so on, so that we can have that open conversation. We need to build this together.
Do any of the businesses get deliveries from the street?
A couple of them do. Subway does, and probably have Hazard Press. Anything that Beck's Florist and Heritage Enterprises both have access to the back parking lot as well as Main Street. So yeah, we wanted to definitely include everybody in that dialogue as we move forward.
Thank you.
Alderman Milawambwe and then Schmidt.
Okay, thank you. I've known Jim for a very long time, so I can generally sense, you know, when he's hesitant about something, and so I really think we should just go ahead and pave it, and you know, and get the work done in the most efficient way possible. You know, coming out of a budget discussion and looking at some of the costs that we've seen, and also the revenue projections. And in addition to the revenue projection, we also have, you know, staffing resources, you know, that I think are fairly lean. I mean, some would argue that, but I think that's the case. So I think we have to lower our ambitions and be a little bit more efficient time-wise, but also in terms of cost. You know, there may be a time where we could experiment, with all these things, but I think right now is just not the time. I'm looking at the cost. We just don't have the means for our ambitions. You know.
Okay. Let's see. Alderwoman Schmidt and then Alderwoman Burgess.
I'm also very supportive of paving this. I don't think that it restricts us in any way with creative placemaking. Love some of your ideas, Jamie. I think that's good. We've seen amazing things come out of the DBA Design Committee. I think there's just lots of opportunities there, and to me, that's the most pragmatic thing we can do.
Alderwoman Burgess.
I wanted to clarify something, and I'm glad you put the prices back up here, because this creates the impression that it's $35 or nearly $1 million, and that's that seems to me those are the outside numbers. What I'm interested in is what are the in between. All right, so what do we get for $100,000? What could we do if we say we'll spend $100,000, we'll spend more than we would just with resurfacing, but let's put $100,000 into it. What would that look like? And that's why I think this conversation to me is a little premature. I mean, maybe to hedge our bets, we put it on the resurfacing plan. Great, but we've got summer is long. We just started our resurfacing process. We've got some time maybe to look at what other things we could do, because again, this is a very flexible recommendation. It's not all or nothing. I thought Jamie had some excellent comments on how we can achieve things that's a little bit more cost palatable. I'm not going to suggest that we should spend $1 million on a single block. That's not what I would hope. But if we can get something really outstanding for 100, or different, or more achieve some of those things we want to achieve, maybe that's a conversation worth having. And it certainly changes the equation when it comes to what's the most fiscally responsible thing to do this year.
So these estimates, it is so difficult from a staff perspective to give any estimates. I mean, what we did is we looked at Argyle Street. That was public. They had some public pricing, and we used that. We used some of the Monroe Street estimates from Hanson. So as a staff, this is just the best information that we've got. So no design has been done. We're just trying to give the council some sort of a sense of range. So to be fair, it is not definitive from a cost perspective. And from the $100,000 perspective, I think that's more gets to what Alderman Matthew was talking about with you can do more with bump outs and some other aspects that really beautify that area. But 100,000, you can't make that stretch into doing the whole block in brick. But I'm sure there's some other thoughts you have behind that can make it try to work.
Alderwoman Painter.
Well, I just wanted to weigh in and give my opinion. I think that we need to get on with it and get moving, and if doing asphalt is the quickest, cheapest thing we can do, then let's do it. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments at this point? That's a good way to end it.
Staff has the direction we need. Thank you very much.
I was going to say Alderman. Mr. Rasmussen.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great discussion. And on the latter issue here on the pavement, I think what we've got, as you will see, was bringing back to you a resurfacing contract for, I think, $4.2 million at the next council meeting, and included in that will be Jefferson Street. So you have time to think about that, and if you want to change it or pull something off of that, we can do that. But that's what we'll bring back based on the input we've got from you. And then also at a future date, we'll bring back to you a resolution about the downtown task force recommendation in general, and that will be in such a way that it allows you to give us some guidance and still leave us some flexibility to move forward, so we can have those kind of conversations and find out what the cost will be. And we'll bring that back to you at a future council meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, George, our legal counsel. Although we didn't have any pending legal questions this evening, but we appreciate your coming. Is there...
Mayor, real quick.
Oh,
I just wanted to say thank you to Amelia. I mean, you as the chairman of the Downtown Task Force, you did a significant amount of the heavy lifting on this. The rest of us were there, but you really pulled this together, and it's actually one of the better reports I've seen in a long time. So thank you for making sure that got done that way.
Thank you. Kudos. At this point, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second? Lots of seconds. Second by Alderwoman Painter, for sure. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.